Data is becoming a weapon now. We see in the kind of a modern warfare where misinformation is just part of that war, as it's state-funded propaganda or corporate-funded greenwashing.
Neither companies nor algorithms have empathy or feelings, and so it's not going to protect us, it's just going to create risk.
Why is it that we have so little, apparently so little trust in the data that's provided by our systems right now?
I think the most important tool that we have is our own sense of judgment.
One of the things that analytics has been bad at has been actually activating the data. And now we're at a point where it becomes so easy activating data with AI.
That's exciting. Very, very large, robust data sets can now be activated in more effective ways. That's something that I believe to be true and that I'm hopefully going to be exploring.
It does, however, open a real dangerous door to bad players. There is no question about that, because you can scale a bad strategy very quickly with AI. And there is no real regulation in place currently against that. There probably won't be for a little while.
People started to figure out that the same data that could be used to change your purchasing behavior is the same that could be used to change your political behavior and many other aspects of your life.
We ought to take a bigger voice as professionals in the discourse around this. I think that we have a chance to not only set a direction, but explain to policymakers what might be important and what is not. Because right now, a lot of the policies that are being made next to the AI Act, they might not necessarily pick out the most important aspects.
The role that our subset of the industry can do is that we can actually be innovators, and we can move fast, and we can test things, and we can test the principles of things as well.
We're becoming more and more aware of how analytics can be misused to compromise the privacy of users for economic purposes, to gain money.
We ought to be active defenders of the correct and responsible, utility-oriented use of data in our society.
So I think that we should kind of keep our garden of analytics as clean as possible.
We need to be something more. We need to think about some other things, the technical issues and tech savies and all the things.
It's hard to say right now what things like generative AI will unfold into and those effects. But you're also seeing a rise, or at least to me it seems like there's a rise in reactionary worldview in which we have a nostalgia for a past that maybe really didn't even exist, and we want to go back to a place that feels safer. Maybe it's safer because it actually lives in the past and we can actually know what it is, we can imagine it, and sort of a future with increasingly rapid impact from technology is maybe a future that we can't imagine, or we imagine it to be one that we don't have a place in.
It's quite scary that a lie would spread much faster than a truth, and then it becomes really hard to counter that lie because people are not interested. People would usually spread information if it's in line with their emotional biases, regardless if it's true or not. So it's just the human nature that we are trying to work against, which is very, very difficult.
The truth is very often subjective. So if you have the same person that has one political bias will look at the data and see one thing, and somebody else will see something else, because a lot of the data that is, at least what we're doing with the digital analytics, it's really highly related to people and situations.
My personal experience about this was during the Egyptian revolution. I saw people dying in front of me, and it could have been me, you know. I don't know why this sniper or person picked that person and didn't pick me. And I always wonder, you know, that when I talk with people in family or friends and they defend that act, I always wonder, it could have been me. Are you okay with me being killed because I have a different opinion? The community split in half, or some part, depending on your political position. If you're in support of the regime, then you would see this as a justified action. If you're against the regime, then you would see this as a horrible act of crime. My thought at the beginning was, maybe it's the less educated people that gets confused. But then you see people with PhDs, people who are very, very well educated, that would see the same picture about something wrong happening and they would just agree with it because it's in line with their emotions. So this is where I got to the conclusion really that it was never about the facts and it was never about the truth. The truth is subjective and it depends on where do you stand in the spectrum.
So it's not really about the truth, it's a momentary truth in relation to the market. So to be able to step away from that and saying there are bigger truths out there that we can actually protect and work with. I think that's interesting, and that's where we can use our skills beyond making companies richer.
The reason why we're motivated to talk about data quality is because we want the material that we're working with to be right. And that is kind of odds with the idea of fake news and misinformation and propaganda, because that's not what's right. And so I think that actually that empowers us to pursue the truth for ourselves and for society.
These machines, these models, they have been trained on what currently exists. Therefore, what we are going to get back is often a very useful summary of what we want to know about, a domain of knowledge, and it's a great discovery tool. But expecting it to come up with high originality, anything that is pioneering, that may well be a naive hope.
What is happening is that images no longer have the meaning we think they do. They are not actually representations of reality. You can't distinguish between the two. So as individuals, we have to move into a different mindset. These things where voice, video, photos, all of it becomes indistinguishable from the fake versions or the created ones, it means that we need to discover new ways to ensure clarity. During the next 10 to 15 years, we will begin having physical, face-to-face meetings for particular things. The most important things will need to be physical, face-to-face, because that's going to mean something different now than it did 10 years ago. And the video and the imagery and all of those things, you have to treat them as potentially interesting, might contain a fact, but you have to be skeptical. And that general skepticism is going to be something we need to teach ourselves and our children.
Optimistically, there'll be a transitional generation where there's going to be a lot of negative effects, but perhaps the generation after it will just become native and it won't be, they'll know how to navigate it and it will just be part of their environment.
Nowadays, you could bring the worst out of people by fear. If you make them afraid, they will be much worse version of themselves. And this is what happens, what I saw happening in Egypt, what I saw happening in many places. You push someone to the edge, and they will act to the worst possible way. And in that state, no data, no facts, no truth would even matter. It's just pure emotions.
Very often, top management didn't like the feedback from analytics because it was contrary to the decision the business wanted to go in. And that is not being data-driven, right? That is actually ignoring data deliberately because you want to do something else. Can you claim to be data-driven if you have an agenda and you enforce that agenda over what the facts are saying? Or should you at least stop to consider, am I doing the right thing?
The challenging part is people confusing data with truth. That for many, when you say, show me the data or give me data, they would confuse that with show me the truth or give me the truth. While in reality, both are two different things. So the same data could be used to prove something and it's complete opposite if you are putting that data in different contexts. And it's not only about data storytelling, it's about how do you interpret this data.
If we're talking about the amount of data that who has data on everyone, other than someone like China who has a ridiculous amount of data on their citizens, if you think about European countries, America, anyone in Africa, the amount of data they have on the citizens is a lot, but corporations have more. When it comes to behaviours, wants, needs, political reasoning, they probably know exactly not just who you vote for, but the sub-elements of why you would vote for those elements.
How come we ended up in a place where there are just these giant corporations that are doing what they please and get this certain amount of liberty to operate, basically being in the pockets of everyone? I come from this advertising industry where I kind of see like how they push the bar, how much data is being pushed there and how it's being misused, and I left that.
We have an issue in our industry, and especially in the display space, with selling audiences and data being shared incorrectly, and that has probably hindered the growth of our industry because we've had to put in place things from a privacy perspective that potentially are too extreme, but we had to go too far because people went too far the wrong way.
As data professionals, we also hold a lot of power to decide what gets collected and what gets passed from place to place. I'm not going to talk directly about privacy, but that's some of it. Thinking about where we have a hand in producing data or vending data and who we're vending it to sometimes isn't given enough thought either.
Certainly when we talk about privacy, we've seen legislation and now we're seeing movements by tech actors. And while initially we can say, for example, for Apple's app tracking transparency, oh wow, this is privacy preserving, we are today understanding that each actor optimizes for their own incentives, whatever the cost.
In that respect, I can see how technology, where on the one hand we think it might be liberating because it potentially can empower individuals. At the same time, if there's a sense that these technologies, the value doesn't get distributed uniformly and actually the value is really concentrated, that influence and power can get more and more concentrated, and you have sort of a very long tail of very few that have a tremendous amount of influence, and then maybe there's a lot that don't have much influence.
Question the incentives of who you're working with. When Tim Cook stood up in 2018 to say, we believe privacy is a fundamental right, I was in the room, I was happy to hear it. But today I realized that it's a strategy like any other.
There's certainly going to be some big disturbances this year, positive and negative, I think, with respect to advancements in AI. It's not just about how it's changing the work of data professionals, it's changing the way that society might operate, and we don't really know how that's going to turn out. But I've enjoyed hearing the perspectives of people here about what they think it means for the future. And so I think this is this really interesting snapshot into what's happening right now.
What we are seeing is a shift not towards pure automation of everything, just let the machine run with it. That's not even brave, that's quite foolhardy at this point in the maturity of the technology. Right now, what's absolutely sensible, what's absolutely appropriate, is to make sure there is a human agent as part of the system. If he's using AI, if he's using any sort of smart automation, if there is machine learning involved, this is to be scrutinized. We come back to the point of trust again. We make sure that what we are getting from the system is valid, is appropriate, we can understand the outliers, we can ensure that it's used appropriately, it's accountable. The accountability and responsibility is still with the human, but we can get a huge amount more efficiency by using these AI technology.
It's an extra layer that is being added to our life. That will give us an influx of AI-driven marketing. And then there will probably come a sanity check and a second reasoning where we realize that a lot of the shit that has been done by AI isn't actually that good because it falls back on bad data.
With respect to like the larger question of, generative AI or whatnot, I do think there's like this constant struggle of, again, there's a trade-off between utility and privacy. And that's something that we'll all have to navigate and be cognizant that maybe you don't want to put anything that is private or might be something that you wouldn't want someone else to be able to use into some of these systems.
The space between us starting up an AI and then the action that the AI does at this point, we feel like that's pretty far apart. How can I be responsible for this thing out there? But it's not really that far apart. It is just the same thing as us operating a machine, just extended. And we, of course, have to realize it. So, with great power comes great responsibility, right?
What I fear for the moment is while we build up this structure of enforcement and this understanding, there is more money that goes into the AI hype. So our pendulum is skewed. And so from a professional perspective, it means we're going to take advantage of all of that and invest. From a personal perspective, it gets back to what I said in the beginning. We need to be selfish and be careful about what we're sharing.
For me personally, like the genetic tests that people do, something in me or 23andMe or whatnot, that's something that I wouldn't want to do because it not only gives up information about me, but it gives up information about others as well, about my family or who knows what. And in a way, it's almost, you're making a decision for others as well. People have been not really thinking putting data that is either from the business or personal into these systems without really being cognizant that that information now goes into the larger database and inference or predictions come from that. And so that information is now, you've spilled it in and now that can leak out. And it seemed nuts to me.
That was fascinating for me this year to think about, we think about AI within the context of data, but it's living in a different column of approach, right? Trust and safety versus data privacy.
If it's driving your car, if you don't feel you can trust it, then you have to drive your own car. So we'll have the world we split into the paranoids that won't be getting anywhere and the happy-go-lucky that will just say, AI, take me wherever you want to and I'll sleep in the back. And that's kind of the critical thinking, saying, okay, I will look at the statistics, I will look at everything, and if I feel I can't trust the car, then I will have to look in my contract saying, if something happened and I'm not driving, am I liable or is it the car company? And if it says it's me, then I can't take the risk with my family and the kids are in the car, because then I will be liable for trusting a digital entity that will fall back on me.
AI is bringing a seismic shock to our industry everywhere, but to our industry specifically because of what it can help you understand from the data and how it can help you action the data for the better or the worse.
If you start reading the AI contracts that people are signing, then you accept liability. Because no sane company will accept liability for their product when it's something that the user can change.
AI can help us a lot in sending relevant messages to people who actually want to hear us, which is, I think, the interesting part of our industry, is maximizing the information that exists in the messaging that we send out.
The AI Act the ink is dry almost, I think 48 hours and Europe is done. There will be a document, it's called the AI Act. For better or for worse, it's always the same thing. It builds on top, normally, of the GDPR. There might be some quirks, but okay, nothing is perfect. Which means that us citizens need to be involved in any kind of data processing to feed the beast. The GDPR ideally has taught us we need to go back to the data subject to ask for their opinion before we do anything. That link is not great, but it's an obligation.
Of course, it's difficult for all of us to navigate when the old methods that we've used become outdated or are hindered by technology's advancement and the privacy-first direction. But on the other hand, it is also making us question, are we providing value for the data that we're using? Or is it a crutch that we use to tell ourselves that we are doing the right thing? Is it really necessary? And when it is necessary, couldn't we actually explain it to the user and the consumer in a way they would actually appreciate?
We are very small down that pecking chain. Changing that thought process from the ground up is the only influence that we will be able to have. And what we've got to hope is that some of that filters through to the leaders at these large organisations, to the leaders in government, where they start to see a movement in the grassroots of the industry.
In order to understand that to be relevant in the future, it's not enough to be good in the technical issues and all the tools and all the trends of the technical issues and everything. We need to be something more. And the something more is not only implementing technical instructions.
It feels like the industry is changing. It's being sort of unshackled from I use this software to these are more general abstract concepts that are important for being a good analyst and for problem solving. And I think anytime you're an operator, you're really at risk of being made redundant.
Analytical thinking will be a must, like the read and write at some point. That was, I think, said back in the last century, but I still see it very valid today. How do you read the data? How do you interpret the data? And the other part is a responsibility on the leaders of the societies who have the responsibility of holding people accountable. So when a misinformation or disinformation is exposed, there is a responsibility to counter that with the correct context.
If we could underline or hashtag that in some way, I think that would be a crisp way of looking at accountability is a key solution for establishing trust. And with trust, then we can move forwards. Then we can engage with this sliding window of maturity and staying ahead of the curve.
One of the key aspects that need to happen in order to safeguard also against the misuse of power by governments is to place the data closer to the user and follow some of the principles that we've heard about in this exciting conference about how privacy by design is not just about not using particular methods, but it's also about not collecting particular pieces of data if they're not necessary.
Let me give you the most graphic example that I have, which I'm appalled with. So let's say that you're a government and you have somewhere on your website there is a big content about welfare. And for instance, you have a tracker installed on this governmental website, which is nothing new. We have governmental websites with Facebook tracker, Google Analytics and others. So it's nothing kind of out of ordinary. But ultimately, if it goes into the wrong hands, you can profile people who are looking for welfare, so they're more susceptible to end of the month loan, to gambling, to everything. So then you use those profiles who went on these specific pages in the internet and try to target them with advertising that is connected with their weaknesses. This is exploitation 101, and we're working with governmental institutions and they don't see the problem while it's super apparent. You can go to Google and you can buy similar traffic as part of the list of audience that you can target. So that's the easiest way to explain how the data could be misused.
The same goes for our governments. They need to also begin to adopt practices that put the citizen in the key role of controller of their data. That allows the citizen, unless very concrete, suspicions about criminal activities and so on that can be documented in court of law, to govern their own data. And I think you're very right that if you imagine a society developing in which we are having a great relationship, benign relationship between the citizens and the governments, and we're building up this extremely rich information layer. In the situation where governments change, and they sometimes do, then that is not the best recipe, and it puts a weakness at the core of our democracies.
That is scaling rapidly, and especially if you think about the amount of talks that have covered off privacy, covered off the right for a user's own privacy within every platform, within every type of activity. What we need to be more and more cautious of is how we put processes in place and how we make sure that people are respectful with that data, but we need to work out what it is they've got. And that isn't the one whistleblower that happens every 5 years. It's actually a transparency conversation to say, why does a government need that data? Why does Google actually use that data? And hold people accountable, people being governments, because governments change all the time. And it's definitely, it comes to a head when we have significant change in a leadership of a country, whether that be in the States when it goes from Democrats to Republican, whether that be in Europe when you go from a forward-thinking leader to someone who is caught up in the past and doesn't really appreciate what they have available to them.
When you look at the world today, we see more wrong uses of data than good uses of data. It's people deliberately misinterpreting the data to support their own agenda.
You can play with the data and make it look as it's saying something when it really doesn't.
As an industry, that would be nice if we were more vocal in giving pushback to that. You had Ibrahim's talk today about the statistical and how bias impacts us and our standing and how we tackle data. But that is a global thing, right? It's a human issue that we don't really invest in understanding the data. We jump to the fast conclusions. It's as simple as that, right?
You'll hate me for my answer, but I don't think it's super bold. Like, it's what every American and most of the Europeans will say, like, just vote better. There is this large imbalance between the state and the society. I believe that the problem is almost non-existent in the Nordics, in Europe. The government and the society balance of information is a little bit better than what we are used to in Central Europe, basically.
And we're in a privileged position to point those out. we're in a privileged position to, rather than maybe defend ourselves against the policies that are taking data away, then embrace the development and inform it. So take a bigger stance in saying, actually, this protects the citizen, and if we do it like you're suggesting, it will put a burden on the citizen.
The basic idea of protecting user privacy was always there in the informatic world. I mean, when I went to school and I am a computer engineer, they taught me about all of this. But the point is that the lawyers and people who, created the legislations, I don't think they were aware 10 years ago of what could be done with cookies, analytics, and data, at least, in the digital world.
The level that we have now of misinformation and disinformation would eventually lead to a disaster. We are heading toward that. We see that in politics, we see that in economics, we see that in many aspects of our life. And I think the only way that we can do is, as an analytics community, is to lead the way of promoting the statistical analytical thinking.
Are the actors involved in there, like the law firms, the auditing firms, perfect? I don't think so. But let's think in terms of what do we need to build to go in a more safe way towards the future. And an example of that is, who is going to audit algorithms? What kind of structure are we going to set in place? Auditing for financial systems has never been perfect, but it gives us an idea, and auditing algorithms is an opportunity, certainly for those who are at Superweek. So this is kind of how I see it. Believe in the system and defend yourself. Be critical about what you see and try to build together with those you trust.
There are many different tools and technologies that we're already aware of, but we're not really taking that stance as maybe client-side representatives of analytics or agency-side implementers of analytics, not taking necessarily the role of setting that discourse going. And I think we can.
Looking at the customer relations as an industry, we're not changing the world, we are just pushing more product. But if we flip it and say, by doing our job well, people will be spending less time choosing products. We're helping people get more time because we help the communication be more relevant, because that's the function we have in business. Now, what data can do on a higher level, that is changing the world. That is actually doing something good, because then we can go and actually start applying the data to the world and not just the website.
As an industry that's very prominent and primary in terms of the data collection, feeding the systems, yeah, that's absolutely true.
In order to make it practical, is to change the phrase from changing the world, change it to change a world. If you are in an organization, in your organization, you don't have to change the culture of your organization. Maybe it's not your role, but you can change a culture. In order to be relevant in this technological and AI world, in this future world, is to make a change happen.
Back in the day, I used to work in database marketing, as I was like direct mail. And I used to build models, like targeting models, to be like data set, and the actual files were real, tapes of real. So one of the days we got to go to one of these, the place that actually operationalizes it. And there was people walking about moving 8-track tapes and 9-track reels, IBM reels. I was like, oh, what are they doing down there? And he goes, they know nothing. Those people down there know nothing about how the computer works. They just know when and where to put the tape for when the computer needs it. And I've always kept that image in mind. to me, that was always an analogy for folks who only knew how to use like a particular software. When they defined, when the very grammar, the mental models of their work was defined by this software, and it's the way it does it. I always think of like those people who are just like putting tapes and moving tapes and having really no understanding of the larger context, and they were really just part of the machine. And I think it's important to not just be part of the machine.
So this is us as analysts thinking outside and beyond the box that we're actually being put in.
One thing I think that data people do have to our advantage is a strong sense of the truth. You know,
you maybe should not scale this particular process X times because you can. Still thinking about spamming because I can't think of anything else, because that's just the most obvious thing that comes to mind.
I think a lot of these things, they can potentially be so powerful that it does induce sort of maybe potential instability or insecurity, but again, you know, we'll see.
I don't think the data's where the power is. No, I think you have to have some form of influence to start.
So I'm very afraid the beast is going to be fed for a couple of years.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
But honestly, should is it not too tacky, cocky?
No, I love it.
Because I barely can see you.
5, 4.
Can I wear those glasses with tag life? No, right? No.
Well, yeah, the tag life. Now that you said that, you should.
Can you give me the glasses with tag life?
All right, 5.
Come on, man.
3. Hello and welcome back to Superweek TV. What are you doing to me, Juliana?
Oh, let's say bye to Rick. He's going home.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rick. So nice to see him. Was another one of the quotes, but you know that.
I was part of the problem for a number of years before selling my agency a couple of years back. What you could do is actually be the whistleblower.
We good? Yay! Alrighty. 13? Oh, 13's unlucky. Can we do one more minute? No, don't worry.
Rolling. Get the camera rolling. Making a documentary today. It's about analytics. I bet you didn't know that.